ledge. Look at that thing, dude. What is up, y'all? So back in 2006, I was watching this Bassmaster Elite Series show in Lake Guntersville in the summertime, and all the guys were catching fish on offshore ledges. And I had no idea what they were talking about when they said ledge fishing, but it sounded really cool, and I really wanted to learn how to do it. And so I started going through all the Bassmaster magazines I had. I went on online forums, watched YouTube videos, stuff like that. But I just never could find a good source of information on how to ledge fish and how to be successful when I had no idea what I was doing. And I really didn't learn to ledge fish until years later when I started doing it myself in this boat. So what I'm gonna try to do today, guys, is create a complete guide to ledge fishing. It's become one of my favorite techniques over the years, and I've learned a lot through trial and error, and I'm gonna try to put as much information as I can in this video to help you guys learn how to find fish on ledges, understand what ledge fishing is, and maybe give you some tips that you haven't heard before in other YouTube videos or online. Okay, so first up, what is a ledge? And a ledge is basically the edge of a creek channel or a main river channel. And if you don't know what either of those things are, or you don't know how to read the topographic map here on the screen, I recommend checking out this video in the top right corner first. And this is a video I did explaining exactly what creek channels are and how to read topographic maps, and it'll be really helpful for you to understand the rest of this video. So go check that out and then come right back. Okay, so assuming you know what a creek channel is and how to read these topographic maps from that video, let's zoom in here a little bit, and you can see that a main river channel runs right up against the shallower water here. And this shallower water is in 10 to 20 feet of water, and the main river channel is about 50 to 60 feet deep. And a ledge is any place where really deep water, like 50 or 60 feet of water, runs up right against shallower water, like this 10 to 20 foot water. And I represented the ledge with this red line. It's right where the deep water and the shallow water meet. So that's how you can find ledges using topographic maps, but I'm sure that some people are still a little bit confused about what a ledge is and can't quite visualize it. So let's take this example of a pool to explain what a ledge looks like underwater. So this is just your normal swimming pool with a shallow end and a deep end. And the shallow end up on top is 3 to 4 feet deep, and the deep end is 10 to 12 feet deep. And that's where you'd have the diving board so you don't hit your face on the bottom of the pool when you dive in. And there's actually a depth change from that 4 feet of water in the shallow end of the pool to the deep end that's 10 feet deep. And that change in depth from 4 feet to 10 feet is the ledge. You can see there's that sloped surface that goes down from 4 to 10 feet. That's exactly what a ledge looks like underwater. And when people are talking about ledge fishing, this is what they're fishing. And so always just visualize this swimming pool when you're thinking about ledges, and you're gonna know what you're fishing. So now hopefully you have an image in your head of what a ledge looks like. And so for the rest of this video, I'm going to be using this illustration to explain ledge fishing. And the brown area here is the bottom of the lake, and the blue area is the water. And this is going to be the top of the ledge. And let's just say that there's 20 feet between the surface of the water and the bottom right here on top of the ledge. Then over here is the center of the creek channel, or the deeper water. And let's say there's 40 feet between the bottom and the surface. And if we pull over that topographic map again, right here is the center of that creek channel on that topographic map and on this illustration. And then right here is the top of the ledge, both in the topographic map and in this illustration. So hopefully you can get a frame of reference of what I'm talking about, both on the topographic maps and using this crudely put together illustration. And ledge fishing is the best during the summertime, between May and September. And bass will bite on ledges other times of the year, but the best bite for ledge fishing is in the summer. Now that you know what a ledge looks like and what it is, let's get back out in the lake, and I'm going to show you why people like to ledge fish. First fish today right there, guys. Flutter spoon, there's a bunch of fish right down here. I need to mark this, get back in there, but that is a good fish. First fish today, ledge fishing. Man, this was one of the best ways in the world to catch fish. You go hours without bites, and then all of a sudden, boom. There we go, guys. Really nice bass right there. Probably a 2.5, 2.25 pounder, and just got him on that 5.5-inch flutter spoon out here offshore. And I was just jerking that thing 3 to 4 feet off the bottom. And there's some suspended fish out here today, out here in 17 to 22 feet of water on these ledges, and beautiful bass. Let's put them back. That's awesome. Just out here in the middle of the lake, and I actually graphed around for about 2 hours, probably an hour and a half, 2 hours, before finding a little spot that had some fish on it. And that's pretty typical when you're ledge fishing, guys. You're gonna go a long time until you find some fish, but normally when you find them, they'll either be grouped up or it's gonna be a pretty big one. They're definitely grouped up here. That's a good one. That's a big one. Stay on fish. That's a big one. There we go. Golly, that's like a 4 3/4 pounder here. I have a stinger hook on the spoon right here. It keeps getting caught up in everything. But that's literally the next cast. Look how fat that fish is, dude. Man, with a biting like this, you have to stay on top of them though. You can't drift too far away. You want to make sure that you stay in that area because you want to make that exact same cast every time. And when you do, you're gonna get rewarded with toads like that, dude. I'm gonna weigh this guy real quick. Let's get a weight on this guy. I'm seeing 5.15 pounds, almost a 5 1/4 pounder. That is an awesome fish, dude. Gotta get right back down there though. That's 2 casts in a row. Beautiful bass. Woo! Let's get that beast back down there. That's 2 casts for like almost 8 pounds. I got a waypoint marked on my graph here, and when I set the hook on that first fish, I hit waypoint where my boat was, and so I'll be able to hopefully get close to making that same cast. I have the wind blowing me around a little bit, and so normally if you can get back in that exact same spot, make that same cast, you're gonna get bit again. And when you drift away like this, it sometimes makes it difficult. And especially when I'm talking so much and weighing them, normally in a tournament situation, I would just throw that fish in the live well, get right back up and make another cast in there. But that is so fun, dude. Man, that was awesome. I stumbled on the motherload of fish on this ledge. And here's the spot I was fishing. It's the same ledge I showed you earlier. And again, here's that main river channel. Here's the ledge. And then this is the top of the ledge right here where you can see there's no contour lines and there's actually a flat spot up on top of this ledge. And that's where all the fish were sitting. And that's pretty typical in the summertime when fish get on ledges. When they're actively feeding, they want to be up on top of the ledges. Okay, so here's that illustration I showed you earlier, and what I want to do is show you how bass relate to ledges. And they don't always set up in the same place, and they're going to act differently depending on where they set up on the ledges. So the best case scenario is when bass are sitting up on top of the ledge and they're really close to the bottom. When bass set up like this, that means they're actively feeding and they're pretty easy to catch, and you can pretty much throw anything down on those ledges and get these fish to bite. Now, the best way to tell how the bass are positioned on the ledge is using the down scan on your fish finder. And I'm going to be showing a lot of images using down scan in this video, so if you don't understand how to read a fish finder or you want to brush up on those skills, check out the video in the top right corner. It's a complete guide to bass fishing electronics, and I break down everything from how to read these images to what fish look like on here and everything you need to know. So again, check out that video real quick and then come back and watch the rest of this video. It's going to make a lot more sense. Okay, so here's an image from my Humminbird Onyx unit that I captured a while back of a school of bass on top of a ledge. They're sitting close to the bottom. And all these little dots here are fish, and you can tell that they're fish because, again, you can see the separation between the bottom and the little dots. That's going to let you know they're fish, and you'll know that they're bass because they're spread out horizontally across the ledge, and there's no more than maybe 2 or 3 dots stacked on top of each other. And normally when you get 15 or 20 dots stacked up on top of each other, those are going to be white bass or crappie or some other type of fish. So when you're looking for these bass on structure spots using your down scan, look for those little dots that are spread out horizontally across the ledge and that are really close to the bottom. Those are going to be the most active fish and the easiest to catch. And just for reference, here's a ledge that I scanned that had no fish on it. There's no bass on top of this ledge, and so I didn't fish this. And you can see that there's no fish there again because you don't see any of the little dots up on top of the drop. So another way that bass will relate to ledges is that they'll be on top of the ledge, but they'll suspend 4 to 5 feet off the bottom. And they normally do this when there's not a lot of wind or current. Wind and current will get the water moving, and it will push these fish closer to the bottom and make them a lot easier to catch, and they'll feed a lot more aggressively. But when there's not much current, not much wind, the fish will suspend right over the top of that ledge, and they're a lot harder to catch, and you have to use different baits like a flutter spoon and a hair jig to get them to bite. And this is how the fish were actually set up today when I was catching them on that flutter spoon. And here's an image from my down scan. You can see that there's some fish or some little dots that are 4 to 5 feet off the bottom. And again, you can see they're only stacked 2 or 3 fish on top of each other, so that's normally going to mean that they're bass. And you can also see that there's a little bit of a cloud right here, and that's actually a school of bait fish. And so whenever I see fish set up on a ledge like this, where they're small dots 3 to 5 feet off the bottom, I'm going to pick up baits like that flutter spoon or that hair jig and try to work the bait up through the fish rather than dragging a bait on the bottom like a crankbait or a football jig. Yeah, I was fishing earlier with a lot of different baits, a crankbait, Carolina rig, football jig, swim bait, all kinds of stuff. And I noticed that these fish were sitting 3 to 4 feet off the bottom. Oh, that fish? Yep. And so that flutter spoon, I can jerk it up like that, like you're seeing, and you can get it 3 to 4 feet off the bottom where those fish are suspended, and you can normally pull it right in their face and they'll react to it. And so, man, that's like 2 casts later again, there's definitely a big group of fish on the end of this point on the ledge. Let's let the fish get back down there. You can see it is fast and furious right now, guys. And that's the best part about ledge fishing. You go a long time without bites, and then all of a sudden, bang, 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 and you can put a limit in the boat really fast. Man, that was an awesome flurry right there. I actually caught about 20 bass off the spot, and my best 5 went for over 20 pounds. And just a quick note on how I'm positioning my boat when I'm fishing ledges. Normally I'm going to start with my boat in the center of the creek channel, and then I'm going to cast up on top of the ledge. And I'll do this probably 80 to 90% of the time, but sometimes I'll actually get on the side of the ledges as well and try to cast parallel to the ledge when that school stops biting, and switching up your angles of your casts can reignite that school and sometimes put a few more fish in the boat for you. And here's another spot I found today that had some fish on it. As you can see, again, there's some dots that are sitting 4 to 5 feet off the bottom. There's actually a nice brush pile right here too that those fish were getting in. So just another spot for you guys to use as reference in the future. So whenever bass are setting up on top of a ledge, whether that's on the bottom or suspended off the bottom, you can normally get those fish to bite. You just have to change up your presentation. But the challenge comes when the fish aren't up on top of the ledges and they're actually off the ledge. And these fish are a lot harder to catch. So 2 ways these fish will set up when they're not on top of the ledges is that they'll either be just off the lip of the ledge on that downslope leading into the creek channel like they are here, and these fish can be really tough to get to bite, and you can sometimes get them to react to a crankbait if you bounce it off the lip of that ledge really hard, and they'll come up and grab it as it breaks free from the ledge. And sometimes you can reel a swim bait down there too and get them to react, but it's a lot harder to get these fish to bite than the fish that are up on top of the ledge. And you can also find some fish that suspend over the creek channel kind of horizontally to that ledge, and you can sometimes get these fish to bite in the winter by throwing an Alabama rig or a swim bait down there, but in the summertime these fish are really tough to get to bite, and if I see them set up like this, I'll normally just ignore them and move on to the next spot. Now I've explained how bass set up on ledges, and I've shown you what bass look like on your sonar using downscan, but now you probably want to know which spots you should actually graph to find big schools of bass on the ledges. So what I'm going to do now is show you a bunch of different examples of ledge spots on topographic maps on Lake Uchi, where I was fishing today in Oklahoma, also on a Tennessee River lake, and on Lake Dardanelle, where I've done a ton of ledge fishing over the years. So first up, let's take a look at a few more spots where I found some schools of bass on Lake Uchi. And again, here's the topographic map of the midsection of Lake Uchi. Here's the main river channel, and here's some secondary creek channels that feed these pockets. And in the spring, these bass are going to be spawning back in these pockets in the shallow water. And then as the water starts to warm up and it gets closer to summer, they're going to migrate out of these pockets to the main river channel, and they're going to follow these secondary creek channels out. And along the way, they're going to stop on the bends and turns of the secondary creek channel. And when you go to the bait shop, you're probably going to hear people talking about how they were catching fish on ledges, channel swings, creek channel ledges, stopping points, highways. There's all kinds of buzzwords people use when they talk about ledge fishing. And so let me show you a couple examples of these types of spots so you'll know what they're talking about next time. So here's one of those creek channel ledges that you've probably heard about, and again, here's that secondary creek channel that winds into this pocket, and these bass are going to be moving out of this little pocket after they spawn, and they're going to follow this creek channel, and they're going to stop on two spots leading out of this pocket. The first is right here, where that creek channel runs right up against some of that shallower water. You can see that the contour lines get really spread out, and there's actually no contour lines in this area. And they'll also stop on this little point where the creek channel runs up against this point. And you can see again, there's a little circle where there's no contour lines, and that's a little high spot. And there's a school of fish on both that creek channel swing and on that creek channel point. And these are all buzzwords, I know, but that's what people call them. And so hopefully next time you hear that, you'll know what people are talking about and you'll know what to look for. Here's another good ledge spot that I found on Uchi that had a school of bass. And again, whenever people are talking about creek channel ledges or main river ledges, they're just talking about where a creek channel or a main river channel runs up against shallower water. And so here's the main river channel, here's the secondary creek channel, and the fish are going to be moving out of these pockets, following that secondary creek channel out to the main river. And one of the best places to look for ledge bass are where a secondary creek channel and a main river channel meet. And right here where that red and the blue meet, there's a nice point and a high spot again. And there was a big school of bass that were sitting on this creek channel point where that secondary creek channel and the main river channel meet. And there's places like this all over the lakes that you'll fish, and if you graph enough of these, you're definitely going to find a big school of bass. These are normally what people would call community holes who ledge fish. These are pretty obvious spots that everyone normally knows about, but that doesn't mean you can't catch fish off of them. Now let's change it up a little bit and head to the Tennessee River. The Tennessee River is famous for its ledge fishing, and you probably have seen all the tournaments out on Kentucky Lake, Lake Guntersville, and Lake Chickamauga where they crush giant bags of summer bass on offshore ledges. So let's look at Pickwick Lake, another Tennessee River impoundment, and show you exactly what these ledge spots look like. And I'm actually going to show you some spots where I fished a college fishing national championship on Pickwick and where I found some big schools of largemouth. So here's a map of the midsection of Pickwick Lake, and here is the main river channel. And right here I drew some lines in for the secondary creek channels that feed some of these pockets off of Pickwick Lake. And whenever these guys are talking about catching ledge fish on the Tennessee River, they're normally going to be talking about catching fish off of these main river channels or these secondary creek channels. So if we zoom into the spot right here, you can see where the main river channel on the Tennessee River swings up against some shallower water. And there's actually a high spot right off the main river channel that I highlighted here in red. And you can see that because the contour lines get a little bit shallower right there. And this spot actually had some shell beds on it when I fished it a few years ago, and there was a big school of bass sitting up on this spot. And the reason those shell beds were there was because the current was washing over this high spot, and those shells kind of got caught up on that little bit higher ground off the bottom. And bass love to feed close to these shell beds because it gives a little bit harder bottom for them to ambush shad against. They actually push those shad up against those shells, and it makes it easier to feed on the shad than it does on a muddy, silty bottom, because they can sometimes lose those shad in the silt. And so whenever you're fishing offshore, look for hard bottom like shells or rocks, and you're going to find more bass. And here's one more spot on Pickwick where I found a big school of fish, and this is a pretty big community hole right here. But it's basically where the main river channel and the secondary creek channel meet. And then if we zoom into the spot, you can see that the main river channel and the secondary creek channel meet, and there's a big school of bass sitting right on this point formed by where those creek channels converge. And this is a really obvious spot, and it's pretty much a community hole. It's really easy to find, but that doesn't mean that those fish won't get there and you can't catch them there. You just normally have to hit it when no one else is around, or you have to maybe share the water with some other people. And finally, I want to show you some ledges on Lake Dardanelle. And these ledges are a little bit different from the ones I showed you on Lake Uchi and Pickwick because these ledges are a lot shallower. On Pickwick and Uchi, those fish are sitting in 17 to 22 feet of water, but on Dardanelle, they're only sitting in 6 to 10 feet of water. So here's one of my favorite ledge spots up on Lake Dardanelle in the mouth of Piney Bay, and I actually finished third in the high school world finals championship off this spot. And all it is a creek channel that runs right up against some shallower water in the mouth of this bay. And then if we zoom in here, you can see that creek channel swings up against some shallow water here. And there's actually some brush piles that people have sunk out on the lip of this ledge. And Lake Dardanelle is a lot dirtier than the last two lakes we looked at. And there's also less current back in these backwaters. So because of that, these fish are going to set up a little bit shallower. They're going to be in 6 to 10 feet of water. And they also like to set up around brush a lot more than shell beds or rock. And these brush piles on Lake Dardanelle are going to be right on the edge of these ledges, again in 6 to 10 feet, and you can catch these fish on crankbaits and big worms, just like you would on the Tennessee River, but again, you're just going to be fishing a little bit shallower. But one thing I will say, guys, is finding fish on offshore ledges is not easy. I made it look pretty easy today because I jumped straight to the fish catching, but I spent 2 hours before I found that group of fish graphing, and I actually left that spot and started looking for new water, and I've been graphing for like 3 hours and I haven't got another bite at all. And I've seen some fish on my graph. I've seen like 3 good schools. It looked pretty similar to where I caught my fish earlier, but for some reason they just weren't biting, and I threw a bunch of baits down there and never got bit. And that's pretty typical when you're fishing offshore ledges. A lot of times it's a timing deal where you fish a spot in the morning and you don't get any bites, and then you come there in the afternoon and you're catching them every cast. So don't get discouraged, and if you see a good looking spot, don't write it off if you don't get a bite. Come back and refish it 3 or 4 times throughout the day, and sometimes you can be rewarded with some good fish. So like I just mentioned, ledge fish don't bite throughout the entire day, and there's normally small windows of opportunity to catch these fish. So what I want to talk about now is the conditions that are the most conducive to catching ledge fish and how they kind of adapt when the conditions aren't perfect. So the best conditions for catching fish on ledges is when the current is running. That current is going to position those fish on top of the ledges, and they're going to be a lot easier to catch. And there's normally 2 sources of current. The first is man-made current from like power plants, like on the Tennessee River, where they have the dams pulling current throughout the day. And the other source of current is wind current. And this is one that's overlooked a lot of times by anglers, but whenever you get a 20 to 30 mile an hour breeze, that will really stir up the water and get those offshore fish excited. So here's some footage from a few years back on Lake Dardanelle during a tournament I fished in July. And as you can see, the water is really calm out there. There's no wind current at all. And I'd actually fished all morning this day without a single bite. But fortunately, the dam on the lower end of Lake Dardanelle started generating current at 11 o'clock. And so I pulled up on this spot right when that current started flowing, and I loaded the boat with 19 pounds of fish in 7 casts on a striking 6XD. And so a lot of times you can go hours without a bite because the conditions aren't right. But then once that current starts flowing on some of these ledges, those bass will get fired up and you'll catch them back to back really quick. Here's some more footage from Lake Dardanelle, and this is a day I fished back in the backwater, and there wasn't any current flowing that day, but the wind picked up around 2 o'clock, and again I was struggling all day. I didn't really have any bites, but then the wind picked up and started blowing 15 miles an hour at 2 o'clock, and I pulled up on this ledge spot, again picking up that crankbait, and I started crushing them when that wind was blowing over this ledge, and I caught 24 pounds of bass in 6 casts off this spot. And again, I didn't get anything until that wind started blowing. So don't get discouraged when you're ledge fishing. Try to be on your best spots when that current starts flowing, because you can go from 0 to hero really quick. And last up, here's some more footage from Lake Dardanelle when there was actually a storm that blew through in the middle of the day. And again, those cloudy conditions and that wind started blowing and those fish started chewing offshore. But sometimes you'll get a day when there's no wind or there's no current and the bite is just really tough. And when the bite gets like that, the best thing you can do is get on the spots where you're catching them when the current's running, and then downsize and throw a drop shot, a shaky head, or a little wobble head with a menace grub, and just drag that bait slowly down those same areas. And sometimes you can catch some really good fish doing that. And this is actually some footage from a video I shot last year, and you can check out the link right here to watch how I catch some inactive summer bass on ledges. And one more thing to note, the best way I've found to find fish on offshore ledges is using the down scan on your Humminbird and Lowrance units. But sometimes the water is a little bit too shallow on the top of those ledges to actually pick out the fish on your electronics, and this happens a lot on Lake Dardanelle when those fish are in 4 to 6 feet of water. You just can't see them on the down scan. And so I've actually developed a system to find these fish when I can't graph for them. And what I'll do is I'll actually drop my trolling motor and start fishing down some of the good ledges, and I'll follow the contour lines on my topographic map. And I'll put my trolling motor on 6 or 7 and just fish down these ledges with a crankbait really quickly. And I'm actually going to be looking at my front graph for an image that looks like this. These are some fish that are streaking and feeding underneath the boat, and this is what they'll look like on your front graph when you're just using your trolling motor to get around. And whenever I see fish streaking on my graph like this, underneath my boat, there's almost always a school of fish up on top of the ledge right next to the spot. And so I'll always mark the spot and I'll work it really hard with a worm and a crankbait, and also come back to these spots in tournaments. And you have no idea how many times I've caught giant schools or giant bags of fish using this technique. So if you have shallow ledges on your home lake, try this technique and you can normally find some good schools. Switched up baits, guys. I was throwing that spoon and then I stopped biting it for a little bit, so I switched to a hair jig, and literally like my third cast to that hair jig, dude, choked it. That's all I'm throwing, just a little preacher jig, hair jig, that's what they call it. And whenever those fish are suspended, this is my second go-to bait after that spoon. That spoon will get some really big bites and get them fired up, but when they kind of die down, I'll throw that little hair jig down there. It's a nice 3 1/4 pounder. Let me weigh it here. Okay guys, so we've talked a lot about what a ledge is and what a good ledge looks like, but now I want to talk to you about some of the baits that I like to throw on the ledges. And I kind of break this up into 2 categories. The first is when the fish are on the bottom, and the second is when the fish are suspended 3 or 4 feet off the bottom. So my number one go-to bait when the fish are on the bottom and locked down right on the lip of the ledge is a deep diving crankbait. And this is a Strike King 6XD. I also throw a Strike King 5XD, 10XD, pretty much all the deep diving crankbaits from Strike King. And I'll grind that thing in the rocks, through brush piles, all kinds of places. And when those fish are locked down on the bottom and they're feeding, you cannot beat a deep diving crankbait. But sometimes those fish are on the bottom and they don't want to react to a crankbait, so my other go-to lure is a 3/4 ounce Strike King football jig with a rage craw on the back. And this is a deadly combination offshore in the summertime. I've caught so many fish over 6 and 7 pounds on this bait, so it's definitely one to try. And really, if you're getting into ledge fishing, you can pretty much get by with just a deep diving crankbait and a 3/4 ounce football jig to get started with. And between those 2 baits, you're going to be catching a ton of fish offshore. Now I also have some other baits I like to drag on the bottom, and these are kind of just specialty baits that I'll throw once in a while. I'll probably throw the football jig 60 to 70% of the time, but sometimes baits like a little stand-up shaky head. This is a Magnum Zoom finesse worm, and I'm throwing that on a little 5/8 ounce ball head. And sometimes I'll drag around a Zoom Old Monster. This is a really good bait, especially when they're on shell beds, and I caught a bunch of really big bass on this a couple years back on Lake Dardanelle. And then when the fish first pull off the bank, I'll also throw a Carolina rig a lot, and I'll just throw that with a 3/4 ounce little barrel weight here, and you'll have like the bead and the swivel. If you want to know what a Carolina rig is, just Google that on YouTube. You'll find about 100 videos on that. And also throw a little wobble head. This is a good bait when you're fishing a little bit shallower offshore and those fish are in the rocks. So that's just a little structure bug by Strike King and a little menace scrub there. So great baits, and those are the baits really that I'm going to throw when the fish are tight to the bottom. And then the other group of baits are when the fish are suspended off the bottom and they're sitting 2 to 3 feet off the top of the ledge. And my number one go-to bait for that situation is that flutter spoon. And today, like I mentioned, those fish are suspended off those ledges, and I can rip this spoon 3 to 4 feet off the bottom, let it flutter back down through those fish, and they can't resist it. and this is just a Strike King sexy spoon. And you know, this bait is really good at triggering that school of fish to bite too. So if you have a group of fish that's not biting, sometimes you can rip that flutter spoon through them and get them to fire up, and then start catching them on all kinds of baits. And then another bait that you saw me throw in this video is a hair jig, and this is another really good bait when those fish are suspended, and it's a little more subtle than that flutter spoon, but it catches a lot of really big fish, as you saw. And this is probably my second go-to bait after the flutter spoon. And then the last type of baits I like to throw when the fish are suspended on the ledges are swim baits. And my go-to is a Strike King 5.5 inch Shadalicious swim bait. I'll just throw it in some sort of white color. And I have this on a 1 ounce underspin, and this is a really good setup. I've caught some big fish on this too. It works a lot better out on the Tennessee River, Kentucky Lake, places like that. It doesn't work as well here in Arkansas for whatever reason, but I've still caught some good fish on it. And I also throw, you know, baits like this. Is a little Rage Tail Swimmer. It's a 4.5 inch size, a little bit smaller, a little more subtle than this big Shadalicious. I'll throw that on a little 3/4 ounce jig head here, and both these baits work really well. Just cast them out, let them sink all the way to the bottom, and then just slow roll them back to the boat, and you know, try to fish them 2 to 3 feet off the bottom, and fish will crush them. Well guys, if you're still here, you're definitely a bass fishing fanatic just like I am. And thanks for sticking around this long. I know it's been a long video, but I wanted to pack as much information into this video as I could about ledge fishing, how to find fish on the ledges, what to throw, and some, you know, tactics on how to get more fish off of the ledges. So, you know, it's a video I've wanted to make for a long time. It's one I wish I had when I was younger, when I was learning how to do this. So I hope you enjoyed, and if you learned something and you think a friend might enjoy it too, please share it out with them. I really would appreciate it. It helps the channel grow, and you know, I want to get this information out to as many people as I can, so I really appreciate that. So either way, thanks again for watching, and if you liked the video, hit like and subscribe down below. Leave a comment if you have any questions. I know there's a ton of stuff I covered, so if anything was unclear, just leave a comment and I'll get to it. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.